Mr. Nonsense had no sense at all. No scrap. I mean, he lived in a tree. A tree? Can you imagine? Why do you live in a tree? Mr. Happy asked him one day. Because, replied Mr. Nonsense, I tired living on the ground, but that was too high up. So I moved to a tree to be near the ground. What nonsense, says Mr. Happy. Thank you, replied Mr. Nonsense. And do you know what Mr. Nonsense liked to eat? Porridge. Nothing wrong with that, you might say, but porridge on toast, really? Why do you like porridge on toast? Asked Mr. Nosy. Asked him one day. Because, replied Mr. Nosy, I teared porridge sandwich and I don't like them. And do you know where Mr. Nonsense sleeps every night? In the rolling boat. He bedroom in his house up in a tree. Why do you sleep in a rolling boat? Mr. Strong asked him one day. Because, replied Mr. Nonsense, I touched sleeping in another boat, but it was somewhat comfortable. Mr. Nonsense then said, you might very well expect in a country called Nonsense Land. No, I know somebody else who lives in Nonsense Land. Do you? That's right, Mr. Silly. Mr. Silly and Mr. Nonsense were close friends and saw a lot of each other. Mr. Nonsense was often round at Mr. Silly's house playing jigsaw puzzles. They used to throw the pieces at each other. How silly! And Mr. Silly was often around at Mr. Nonsense's house playing cards. They used to turn them up to see who could get the most pieces out of one card. What nonsense! However, this story is about the time it snowed in Nonsense Land. It didn't very often snow, but one winter it did. Now tell me, what color is snow? No. Nonsense Land, when it snows, it doesn't snow white snow. It snows yellow snow. Don't ask me why, but it does. Yellow snow. And when Mr. Silly woke up one morning, the whole of Nonsense Land was covered. I say, he said, when he looked out of his bedroom window. Snow! And he was excited. He rushed around to Mr. Nonsense's house. Mr. Nonsense was asleep in his book. Wake up! Cried Mr. Silly. Wake up and come and look out of the window. Whatever on earth is it, grumbled Mr. Nonsense, wiping the sleep out of his eyes as he got up and went across to his bedroom window. I said, he said, look out. Custard. That isn't custard, you silly banana, cried Mr. Silly. What's snow? Rushed downstairs. Come on, he called. And that day, Mr. Silly and Mr. Nonsense had one of the very best days of their lives. They had a snowball fight. Mr. Silly's snowballs were round. Mr. Nonsense made snowballs that somehow or others come out sports of squares. They built a snowman, a very silly nonsense sort of snowman. Come on, said Mr. Nonsense. That after. Let's go doggily. We don't, agreed Mr. Nonsense. Mr. Silly thought, oh yes, we do, she cried. Mr. Silly ran back home to Mr. Nonsense's house and came back with his bed. They shouted together as they sailed faster and faster down the hill in their rowing boat, tobogganing. It was a wonderful day, and that evening, after having supper together, porridge pie, and Mr. Nonsense suggested that they played a game. What shall we play? Asked Mr. Silly. The gods, suggests Mr. Nonsense. I forgot to play the gods, said Mr. Silly. Oh, it's easy, replied Mr. Nonsense. I went around and opened all the doors and windows. There we are, he said. Douglas was nonsense.